We're going to talk about the 13 colonies. We need to have a little background first. What is a colony? Well, it is a region or area under political control of another country and occupied by settlers of that country. Now, Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement. This was the first real colony from England. It was established in 1607, and we know that it gained success by growing tobacco. Plymouth was the next major settlement. The Mayflower landed at Plymouth with English settlers aboard. They created the first form of self-government in the colonies. And we call this the Mayflower Compact. The men signed this document and agreed to make decisions and laws together, all based on majority rule. So let's talk about the New England colonies. We know that there are three regions of colonies: New England, Middle, and Southern colonies. The New England colonies are very unique in themselves. Their physical characteristics, they are very close to the Atlantic Ocean. They have a lot of natural harbors. They have an abundant forest. They have very poor soil because of a cold climate. And because of that, they have to do what's called subsistence farming. And that's farming where you only provide for your family. You don't grow enough to sell. You grow enough food for your family, and that's it. That's called subsistence farming. Two natural harbors that we will discuss are Boston and Portland in Maine. Well, that was a territory of Massachusetts at the time, but Portland nonetheless. Some economic factors of the New England colonies. They had many raw materials: logging, fishing, and shipbuilding with those logs was a big deal. Political factors. They used town meetings to really get all the information to everybody that they needed. And they would typically meet in a church in the middle of their town. And this is really how the representative government got its start in the New England colonies, was from these town meetings. Everybody would come together, everybody would make decisions, and then everybody would go back to their respective homes. Some social factors. Most of New England was small coastal towns. Boston is really the only large city, and even still, it wasn't that large. Not as large as some in the middle colonies for sure. And all of those towns are on the coast because fishing and shipbuilding are major economic factors. And then religious factors. Their entire life is based on religion, and the Puritan religion and the separatist influence many different towns and groups and other colonies in New England. Now, the middle colonies, physical characteristics here: they have rich soil, they have broad, deep rivers. They have more natural ports and harbors. Some of the major ones that we'll talk about are New York, which was New Amsterdam, but then the English took it over and named it New York, Baltimore in Maryland, and Norfolk. These really are major ports and harbors. They have very fertile river valleys. They have mild winters, which helps growing crops. They have a lot of raw materials, and they're also pretty close to the Atlantic Ocean. And if they're not, like I'm thinking inland New York, the Hudson River is right in the middle, flows through the middle of New York. So they are very close to the Atlantic Ocean, able to travel very easily by boat. Some economic factors of the middle colonies: they had large farms. A lot of times they would grow wheat. They had logging, fishing, and shipbuilding. Some political factors: they're more tolerant of people and other religions. The Quakers in Pennsylvania, it was a social experiment for equality. And so as far as their politics, they were able to have representation by numerous different types of religions. Social factors: these were still small towns, and most of them were on the coast or near large rivers, like we spoke of the Hudson River earlier. Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore are your largest cities. And for a long time, Philadelphia is your largest city of these 13 colonies. Some religious factors, the Quakers in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was established by William Penn, and then the Catholic in Maryland. Remember, Mary's land for the Catholics. Some southern colony characteristics. Some physical characteristics here. The Appalachian Mountains provided a border here and allowed for some timber to be used here. They had very navigable rivers. That means they were easy to navigate and travel. They had very rich soil and a very warm climate. They had many raw materials, and they had really one natural harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. And so even though the southern colonies are basically a farming community, the Charleston was a major port of entry for the southern colonies and export for the southern colonies. Some economic factors, because of the type of soil and climate that the southern colonies had, this led them to only majorly have plantations. These large farms that were able to grow and raise hundreds of thousands of acres of crops were used and worked on by multiple people. The political factors, because of the plantations and because of the need for people to work these crops and harvest and plant, the southern colonies had many enslaved people. And the southern colonies was a more class-based society. There is a big distinction between slaves and low class and middle class and the high class. And really, there was really only the high class landowners and the very low class land workers. So it was a very class-based society because of the type of soil and the type of economic factor, plantation there. It was a class-based society. So social factors, they also had some small coastal towns, and really these towns were very spread out and very far away from each other because the land was so vast. They had so much farmland that it was really hard to have a town here. But Savannah in Georgia and Charleston, South Carolina, were both their largest cities in the South. As far as religious factors go, the South was much more diversified than the Middle and the New England colonies were. And see, people here didn't come for religion. You know, in New England, people were in New England, in those colonies, on purpose for their religion. In the South, religion was on the back burner, if that. They were in the South to make money off of the plantations. And so the Church of England was still supported heavily in the South, which was just horrified the people of New England, that they would still, say that they were connected to the Church of England. And then many Catholics in Maryland as well, as far as religious factors. So some main economic differences and what you need to know and some key points here. In the New England colonies, shipbuilding and manufacturing become huge. In the middle colonies, agriculture and cattle producing are pretty big. And in the southern colonies, agriculture only is it. There isn't really anything else but agriculture in the southern colonies with those cash crops of tobacco first, then cotton and indigo. Indigo is the dye that makes the color purple. So those are the main economic differences of these groups. And then last kind of note here is the population density. New England and the middle colonies had access to waterways, ports, and rivers, and this resulted in a high population density and large urban areas. Urban means kind of like a city. The southern colonies had an abundant amount of fertile soil that resulted in an agricultural economy, a plantation system. And because of that, they had a low population density. So if you have a lot of people really close together, it's a high population density. If you have not many people spread out, it's a low population density. New England and the Middle Colonies had a high population density. Southern colonies were spread out and had a low population density.